Thank you for joining us for a live town hall on the future of AZPM, coming to you from the AZPM studios, where we have the press room in the radio studios. We produce it right here. I'm Nicole Cox, Radio Program Director for AZPM, and I am joined by our CEO, Jack Gibson, and our Chief Operating Officer, Jean Robinson. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Some of the things we're going to discuss tonight: what the loss of CPB funds means for AZPM, review what AZPM is doing to reduce the effect of the fiscal setback, and take your questions. Why don't we start things off with an opening statement from our CEO, Jack Gibson.
Thanks, Nicole. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I want to begin by acknowledging the stress and uncertainty many of us are feeling, both here at AZPM and among our supporters, many of whom who have been with us for decades. This is a difficult moment, and I know it feels deeply personal for many of us. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting was created by Congress in 1967 and was designed to steward the federal government's investment in public media. The process was straightforward. Congress appropriated funds to CPB, which then distributed most of those dollars to more than 1,500 local public media organizations, AZPM among them, through community service grants. For us, that federal investment made up 12 to 15% of our annual budget, seemingly small, but vitally important. Nationally, it was the only funding specifically intended to guarantee that all Americans, regardless of income, background, or geography, could access trusted news, non-commercial educational children's programming, and cultural content that reflects local communities. At AZPM, every dollar of that support went to producing and distributing original local content that includes daily newscasts on radio and online, The Press Room, and Arizona Illustrated, one of the longest-running local public television series in the country. With that funding now eliminated, we face an annual average shortfall of nearly $1.6 million a year. CPB has announced it will cease operations on September 30th, the close of the federal fiscal year. While this is disheartening, it does not mean public media or AZPM will disappear. But it does mean we will rely more heavily on the people we serve, our viewers, listeners, members, donors, and community partners. AZPM has always operated with a balanced budget, and that discipline will continue. To respond to this challenge, we've adopted a three-part, three-year plan. We need to increase local community support. My thanks to those of you who've recently joined, renewed, increased your contribution, or became a sustaining member during our most recent fund drive. We must also reduce operating expenses, tightening what is already a very lean budget. Finally, staffing adjustments will be required. Unfortunately, this will mean strategically eliminating a few positions in the near term to align revenues and expenses. These steps are difficult, but they are necessary to remain responsible stewards of your investment in AZPM. Our mission remains unchanged: to deliver fact-based journalism, lifelong learning, including student internships and training opportunities to University of Arizona students, and providing entertaining programming that informs, educates, and unites rather than divides us. To continue this work at the level you expect, we must adapt and we must do it together. My colleagues and I at AZPM are doubling down on our commitment to you and to the communities we serve, ensuring AZPM remains strong, independent, and accessible to everyone. With that, let's move to your questions. Nicole?
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate you recapping the points in your statement: CPB's role and the distribution of funds in the public interest, how those funds were used by AZPM, our three-part plan to address the issue, and AZPM's commitment, and reinforcing that, our commitment to this community. I think probably the top question that we've received is, are you closing down? Will you still be on the air?
Absolutely not. We will continue to operate as we have done for more than 60 years now, largely with the largest percentage of our budget comes from the community through memberships, major gifts, corporate support, and underwriting that really has sustained the organization through good and bad times. This is a challenging time, but I'm absolutely confident that we will get through this together.
We do have a question. What impact, if any, will this have on the new campus?
On the new facility?
Most likely the new building.
Okay. So the federal reduction affects AZPM's operating budget, but the new facility is part of a capital budget. That's a completely separate budget. I'm incredibly pleased that there are no federal, no state, no university dollars attached to the construction of that facility. It is 100% donor funded, and we're approaching the completion of that capital campaign at about the same time we're approaching the completion of the construction project. So that is really a good position to be in. In addition, that new facility will help generate new revenues to help support AZPM operations, largely in the original local production area.
So part of the plan to help overcome and move forward despite this news. Gene, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that is exactly, we talk about the two different buckets of money. It's like you have your budget that you spend, and then you have like your 401k. Okay, that's like the 401k, the money that was used for the building. So it's completely different from the operating funds. So the two are not commingled in any way.
I think that's an important distinction to make for certain.
The other distinction is that capital funds tend to be one-time gifts, and the operating budget are annual recurring gifts, either through membership or, in the case of the federal monies, an annual appropriation from CPB. You don't want to get into spending one-time gifts to operate your business, because then you'd have to completely replace those funds each year, and that is unlikely at the dollar levels that we're talking about.
You mentioned in your opening statement the cuts of about 12 to 15%.
Mm-hmm.
What is AZPM's total budget?
We're operating at between $12 and $13 million a year. For fiscal 26, which we're in right now, we'll be very close to $12 million, slightly above $12 million for this fiscal year.
We're getting a question asking about the very difficult... Before I go to this question, I want to ask Gene, how is morale? How are employees doing?
Well, it is a difficult time, and that's to be expected. That is understandable. It is difficult here as it is at every single public media station across the country. In the 6 weeks since the rescission was announced, we've seen week after week stations with 50% staff layoff, 20%, 25%, 35% staff reductions. Just today I saw a staff had reductions of 25% for one public media broadcaster, cutting back productions. So our reductions of roughly 5 or 6% are small, but still the reductions. There are people who will be without jobs. Now, I have lived through this. I spent 30 years in commercial media, and we had either through acquisitions of different stations or through the Great Recession of 2006-07, I was actually caught up in that. And I was one of those people whose jobs was eliminated. And so I had to go home that night and tell my spouse, I don't have a job, and then tell my kids, because this came in December, Christmas will be tight this year. So I know that pain. Because we understand that pain, we're being very, very strategic here and trying to keep that number as small as we can. We're hearing 35%, 20%, ours is 5 or 6%. Small number, but still there are jobs here.
And while there'll be some level of a reduction in force, there are actually new jobs that will be coming online, replacement positions in news reporters and news director and in radio operations, to add strategically to where we need to beef up our operation to better serve the communities and our audiences.
And I think this is a good lead in to the next live question. I appreciate you sharing your personal experience, and I appreciate the sensitivity that you're taking with this topic. Explaining, as you did, how does that apply to? How are you going to decide what positions to eliminate when you're also hiring new people? What's the balance there?
It is comparable to balancing your retirement account. So we've got an overabundance of staff in a certain area of the organization, and we're really lean in another area that we need to balance out without increasing the budget. So we will add positions to balance out the staffing complement to support the strategic goals of the operation, while reducing some positions in an area where we have a depth of positions that can continue to support the operation without the loss of any programming. We may do fewer episodes of a series, but there's no program on the chopping block. In fact, we're talking about adding a new series to the lineup coming this fall.
So you're discussing more of a reorganization and also perhaps a shifting or refining of duties that could help with this very difficult, challenging process.
Absolutely.
To better serve our audiences, what do we need to do to provide them the best content possible? Where are those jobs? Those are the jobs that will be funded.
What percentage of your budget does the 1.6 million represent? To balance the budget, how much more money would you need from every subscriber on average? So I think this is in reference to the 12 to 15%, which is approximately the equivalent of the 1.6 million. So that's, I know it varies a little bit from year to year. So moving forward to their second part of the question, to balance that budget, how much more would you need from every subscriber every day?
So the membership program alone is about a $6 million operation. We would try and replace $1.6 million of new revenue from that group. It is roughly, a third more from everyone, if everyone had the capacity to give a third more. But clearly that's not the case. For some folks, making an annual contribution at $60 is the top charitable gift they make, and we're honored to have that gift. So it's not realistic to look at sort of the whole, but where people can make a larger gift, we're encouraging them to step up, and we've seen that most recently in our just concluded television pledge campaign, where folks were asking how they could help and making of their own volition increased gifts that really did help to offset
on behalf of someone else that is maybe unserved, underserved, that still enjoys and appreciates what we can offer to the community.
And to be clear, that 1.6 million is every year, not just one time, each year. 1.6 million in additional dollars we would need.
Jack, can we explain some of the other roles of the CPB? What are some of the things they did beyond acting as a conduit for the funds?
So principally, they are a conduit for the federal appropriation. The largest share of that, over 70%, went directly to local stations like AZPM and to other public media organizations, whether or not affiliate with PBS or NPR. They also played a very large role in professional development for the staffs at these stations across the country, and then worked with independent producers, so the Independent Television Network in San Francisco, to help independent filmmakers get a leg up, provide seed funding to get some projects off the ground, or in some cases providing finishing funds so that a documentary that had most of the work done but didn't have the wherewithal to complete could finish the production on that. Programs typically from ITVS end up in series like POV, Point of View, and Independent Lens, which are two series that are aired on Channel 6 regularly and are funded independent of the local television station, really through direct funds CPB provides to ITVS.
Which I'm sure is very much appreciated
Absolutely.
when you're trying to start out in that industry and you get a hand up. And I know you also mentioned breaking news and election coverage. They played a role with that as well.
You know, programs like the News Hour and NPR News, when there's a story that breaks that is significant and expensive to cover, think international coverage or a disaster in this country, they have limited resources to apply to that. So they would typically go to CPB and ask for emergency funding to help cover a breaking story. The other area that they help is if a station lost a significant part of their operation. Think a tornado takes a transmission tower down. They would help that station to quick recovery by financing the replacement of the tower initially to get them on the air as quickly as possible.
And I also think it was good that you made a distinction between NPR and PBS member stations and other stations that are not associated. The funding was provided to all non-commercial.
Correct.
Do we know if any of the remaining funds from the CPB that would be left over would be distributed to local stations after they close?
Sure. We learned earlier this week that there is a small pool of funds remaining at CPB following the disbursements over the last couple of years. And they've indicated that stations will receive an additional final payment from CPB. And they've warned us it is nothing on the order of what we typically receive, nothing close to $1.6 million, but that they would clear the books and clear out their accounts as they wind down the service.
We have a question about programming. What will happen to PBS Kids children's programming? I know the CPB provided a lot of funding for these shows.
Well, at this point, I've heard nothing stating that it would be eliminated, so we're expecting it to continue, and we will continue to broadcast it.
So unlike the production of maybe commercial programs for children, there is an incredible amount of research that goes into developing a program for public television especially. And the amount of research, the R&D phase before we get into production on a children's series is really enormous. And CPB has directly helped get some of that research to producers from Sesame Workshop to other children's producers to do some of that early development work before you even know if there's a series that will come from it or what that will look like. So that is concerning that could be lost and make it more challenging to get newer children's television shows produced and off the ground. That's the bad news. The good news is that children typically age out of programs on public television. So there is an inventory of kids shows, and very young children now haven't seen many of the shows already in inventory. So we have a little bit of time, I think, before we see any significant change, but it's concerning long term that there may not be the wherewithal to do the research and development of children's series that really are impactful to the kids that they're designed to address.
Connected to that, viewers and listeners want to know if they'll still have access to their favorite shows on PBS and NPR. We mentioned PBS Kids and Sesame Street. Other things that were cited, Masterpiece, Nova, the BBC.
Yes, as long as they're being produced, we will carry them.
And there's no indication that they won't be produced. There's pretty significant funding behind most of the most popular PBS titles, Masterpiece for sure, Nova. The corporate funding really does shore up a lot of that. It does count on support from local stations, and if the number of local stations were to change, there is sort of a wild card out there, meaning that if 5% of the public television stations were not to be viable financially, could not contribute to a series like Nova or the NewsHour, could it still be produced at the same level? And we're hopeful that it can, but certainly time will tell how stations respond to this.
I think that's a good point, talking about these things are kind of viewed and evaluated all the time. You make tweaks to programming. It may or may not be connected with a funding cut. It's necessarily what is the audience looking for, what's best serving the audience. I think a lot goes into not only the research and development phase, but also watching and monitoring how audiences are reacting and supporting to what is on the air now. We do have another live question. Programming connected. A couple of people have asked about The Buzz, what happened to the program and whether it was cut due to funding. I've lived in Tucson for decades, and one of my favorite programs was The Buzz. What happened to that program?
It was a programming decision. We looked at the audience for that and the staffing for it, and we couldn't support it with the current staffing load that we have. We're working on addressing filling a number of news positions in news, reporters and such, that typically would have supported a program like The Buzz. And until we get fully staffed, we can't even begin to evaluate producing beyond regular newscasts on radio and online.
So just elaborating on that, The Buzz was not cut due to funding cuts. If I can connect this with Arizona Illustrated.
Sure.
If you were to look at the program 10, 15 years ago, it's very different than what we do today, right? So this kind of reworking, revisiting methods and presentation is not uncommon, but the timing was just unfortunate.
Well, you mentioned Illustrated. It's been on the air for 45 years, and I don't know how many iterations it has had, but it's been a handful, so they continue to evolve.
At least 3 or 4 in my time, and with each iteration we've learned things. Some things work better, and audiences are attracted to it. Some things don't work out as well and become maybe too complicated to produce, too expensive to produce. The current iteration with Tom McNamara as the host is by far the most popular in terms of audience appeal from what we've seen, and it's a gorgeous show to watch. I think anyone who knows that program, and there are very few programs in public television nationwide that are produced at that level or in that format, and that is largely because they're expensive to produce.
And it is nice to see, and we're not saying that that level of production will stop. It may just have to be reworked or revisited, the frequency, for example.
Mm-hmm.
In another vein, the press room is a much skinnier production to produce and has perhaps not the same level of acclaim or support initially, but it is growing in leaps and bounds. People really do appreciate the value that it brings to their viewing and listening diet. The press room, as you both know, is the first series we produced for radio, television, and digital simultaneously from a radio studio. This is not a gorgeous set that we've built to do this, but it is indicative of what the future holds for us. We will need quicker turnaround productions that we can light up quickly. And if they work, do more of them. And if they don't, modify them and learn as we go along. It really was sort of an experiment for us. And I think it really has proved out that not everything needs sort of a full studio treatment with a very deep level of crew and the number of people involved in the production.
I also think it's important to point out the collaboration
Yeah.
on the project, right? When this was first thought of, what was it, a year ago, year
September
and a half ago?
of last
A year ago. The idea of the collaboration with other news agencies locally and really across the state was something that was a very exciting prospect. And now I think that's being very well received.
I agree.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the ability to be very nimble in production, but it's also about, especially now given the financial shortfall, a smaller financial footprint to produce quality programming, which the press room is a prime example of what we can do in that vein.
I think Zoom has taught us a lot out of the COVID experience in terms of the quality that people will accept. And it's less about the technology and much more about what's being said and who you can bring to the table to have a discussion and get information, learn something, which really is in our DNA.
Will your new facility help in bringing in new revenue? You did mention this earlier. How do you see the new building helping you in the long run? What are some of the plans for that?
Well, certainly greatly improved production facilities. As you know, the radio stations came online much after KUAT Channel 6 did. And the facilities that the radio stations operate from are not nearly industry standard, shall we say. They are converted office buildings, office spaces in a classroom building. So the acoustic isolation is just very, very difficult to deal with. The new facility addresses much of that. We were in the basement and sub-basement of a classroom building, so seeing what's going on outside, visibility, natural light in terms of environment for our staff to work in, I think it probably is going to be the biggest lift for people to actually look outside and sort of get a sense of what's going on. But certainly the revenue opportunities are part of the strategy for building the facility in the first place through production rental spaces, not just to use the television and radio facilities for the production of content for AZPM and our audiences, but to be able to lease out spaces to others who come in and rent the space to produce content for commercial operations. And not just the revenue derived from that, but also the opportunities it provides for our staff to work on different projects and our student employees to be engaged in commercial projects that would help them land a better job when they graduate and have a greater breadth of experience.
There's also a cost savings when it comes to events. Currently, we need to find a venue to house our events. Sometimes we will get a quote where it's going to be a 4-figure cost. Well, we're public media. We can't afford that. So in the Baker Center, we'll have the ability to invite people to our home, a true public square, to watch these events with free parking as well.
That is very exciting.
It is.
Can you explain what is happening to rural communities that are losing their stations altogether?
That's a tough one, and that is not getting nearly enough attention here. You know, people talk about PBS and NPR. They will be fine. It's a flesh wound, but they will be fine. We will be fine. We will have some small reductions. We'll still be in the air. But again, in the 1,500 plus stations that the CPB funded, most of those are small rural stations who don't carry NPR, don't carry PBS. They're rural, they're tribal stations where their budget is maybe 50, 60, 70% comes from the CPB. They don't know how they're going to move forward. That is a serious bill that no one's really talking about, and they should be.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, that is the toughest story out of this reduction are those very small communities in very remote areas that will do without any level of local service.
And they don't have the access to fundraising like we do. We're in the metropolitan area. We can reach out to donors. It's in those places, it's pretty remote, and the funds are pretty sparse.
I'm getting a question about the Cochise County coverage. What happened to Cochise County coverage?
We lost our reporter down there. We had set up a bureau in Cochise County, 3 years maybe? And about a year and a half ago, the young woman who was working with us graduated, and we lost our ability to provide coverage down there. At the same time, the university was going through a hiring freeze, so we really couldn't replace that position for some time.
Time flies. That bureau was set up 6 years ago.
Oh, my God.
That is a long time
Right.
ago.
Yeah.
6 years.
Right.
One of the questions I'm being asked is about a potential solution to assist with these budget cuts, and that is, would AZPM need to rely more on AI with these budget cuts? Now, this to me is an interesting question. I just attended a webinar that was hosted by Reuters about the use of AI and, of course, the ethics behind it. And I think an interesting take that she had was they don't use it as a tool to complete a project. They use it in the process of determining the project. So, in other words, instead of having AI write an article, they may have AI assemble data. And then the reporter could go in, look at the data, and say, do I want to cover this, this, and this based on the numbers? And then, of course, then you've got a copyright issue. If you have AI write something, you lose the rights to it, and you can't make money off of it. Do we have any opinions? I know that's one of the things that we have a committee looking into. Correct. Is the ethical use and fair use of it. Is there anything that you would like to expand upon?
I think we are attending seminars and trying to educate ourselves in terms of the best practices and how to safely use AI, how to be smart about the use of it. I frankly use it all the time to understand something I don't know very much about. Is everything that I'm seeing completely accurate? No, but if I sort of understand the framework and just need more detail, it sort of leaves me tea leaves to investigate further on my own.
So this is something that AZPM would probably review and determine a policy on to see if it would be at all a useful tool in working towards something, but certainly not the completion of. That's kind of my general
And to be very
understanding.
clear, I can't foresee a time in my career where we'll be using AI to actually write news stories that a live or machine would read to audiences. I think as a research tool, as an information-seeking device, there may be practical applications that need to be vetted and understood better than I do at the moment. But there are technologies out there where you can have an announcer sound very good. It sounds very much like Nicole Cox.
But it's not it doesn't sound like Nicole Cox.
And that's where sort of the ethics come into it. Do we want a group of announcers to all sound the same and be machine generated, announcing material that may have very little human interaction? I still like living, breathing editors to be looking over content that goes out. It's fine. It's sort of an informational tool, I think, but to be very clear, I don't foresee a short-term use to replace positions to save money.
No, we are a trusted source. We're not going to jeopardize that. for convenience.
Or for money.
I appreciate the clarification. Gene, I understand we cannot speak on behalf of the University of Arizona, but people are
But you're going to ask me anyway.
I'm going to
so
ask
go
you.
ahead.
Push you on the spot. People are curious about what the university's position is on support for AZPM.
They will continue to support us. I mean, right now it's roughly 4 to 5% in cash, then maybe 10% in kind. But they have supported us through the years, and they will continue to do so.
The university's biggest contribution to AZPM is the indirect support they provide. Think legal, human resources, IT. Those are valuable services that are coordinated among many units on campus and provide a rich array of services that we certainly couldn't afford to purchase on the open market by ourselves, in addition to things like physical plant, maintaining the facility. The Baker Center is built with donor funds and will be maintained by the university. It's their facility once completed. And that is a very valuable contribution that they make to public media as a key part of their community engagement strategy.
We are an operating unit of the university, so they will continue to support us.
You read my mind. AZPM is the public service of the University of Arizona. AZPM will continue under the U of A structure. No, I appreciate that very much. So the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 created the CPB, saying it is in the public's best interest to develop broadcasting for educational and cultural purposes and encourage programming that addresses the needs of unserved and underserved audiences. What about now? Is there still a need, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I mean, our newest operation will be a full-power FM station in Safford, Arizona. It's a very small community. It's not particularly economically viable for a commercial operation to go in there, but the people who live in that community deserve service. One could say the same for Cochise County or some of the smaller areas, smaller communities that we serve, but people live there and deserve the coverage that we provide. Some of the operations that we will do over the next several years will be to extend the mission of public media, to provide real-time emergency services, warnings for storm, weather, silver, gray, amber alerts to the community in ways that are meaningful to them.
And the newly established turquoise alerts as well.
That is right.
And this is not a shot at commercial broadcast, because I spent 3 decades there, but they will provide news for their metro area. The smaller communities, maybe they're on the weather map. There'll be 80 in this place today, but there's no news coming out of there because it's not worth their time to do that. That's where we can make a difference.
Well, and I think it's important to look at some of the things that the Act was created for, right? To close the educational gap. During COVID, AZPM had a series. Well, actually, we had a series recently that looked back on some of the challenges.
Long road.
The long road.
5 years after.
So here we are. Is that need to close the educational gap still there? Is it still out there? And hence the support would always be welcome.
I think, it's as an educational gap and other gaps, as that series articulated. COVID changed everything, and people fell behind in a myriad of ways. So, but education specifically is what we are tailored to do, and what other people are not tailored to do. So certainly that is something that does need our attention, and we're suited to help in that regard.
And if you think about early childhood education, over half of American preschool kids, the only access to preschool education they have is what they find in their public television station. In Arizona, that number is actually more like 80% of preschool kids just don't have the ability, either economically not viable or they're in rural communities, other than the services we provide, those early childhood services on both PBS Kids and online with our early childhood learning services on AZ Public Media, AZ Early Learning. What's the website?
Learning Media.
Blank. AZ Learning Media.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm losing my earpiece.
Over 30,000 individual learning objects available to at-home schoolers, parents, to educators, to kids. My wife is a retired teacher and could access lesson plans and learning materials to pull into her classroom for free. There are other services out there that schools have to license. When you look around the state and consider how lean budgets are, this is really a valuable service that helps teachers both prepare for the classroom and give kids access to materials that they otherwise wouldn't have.
We mentioned when we discussed the press room the collaboration with other entities in Southern Arizona and Arizona. Is AZPM looking at expanding their partnerships with other Arizona PBS or NPR stations, for example, KJZZ? Jack, would you like to take on that question?
So long before the reduction, we've been in active discussions with not just public media, but commercial media, print media, both in Arizona and outside the state. We have an ongoing conversation right now with Vegas PBS about collaborating on developing content, sharing content. It's very expensive to produce local original content. If we can share stories and have a program that focuses on the Southwest, there are stories that would resonate there, and our stories from here could resonate in Vegas as well.
Well, look at state news that we do right now. That's a wonderful example of collaboration with KJZZ and the other NPR stations.
It may become more challenging as staffs get smaller at our sister stations, but we are absolutely open and more than open, actively addressing and going after these relationships to develop partnerships to share content among stations. We'll launch a new series this fall on the arts that is in participation with several major market stations, including New York and others. I think Vegas is in the group as well, to share stories from around the country, arts and culture stories from their communities, but also to take stories that we're producing as part of Arizona Illustrated and share those with audiences around the country to both expose them to the content coming from here, but also to share with our audiences things that are happening in other markets that I think will provide good value for the investment we're making in that series.
So not only an increase in collaboration, which could be a silver lining to this, but also increased content that will serve even more people. Talking about some of the in-depth reporting that AZPM has been involved with, Tapped was how this viewer started listening to AZPM. Will there be a season 4? I missed the in-depth reporting from stories such as Fundamenta and uranium mining.
Yes. We're in pre-production discussions now. Tagging on to your last question, we're working to pull together some production partners on it to maybe expand it into a larger format, as well as to bring in other areas of the country perhaps that have an interest or are dealing with the lack of water in their communities and what that means for them.
Well, certainly we're not the only community dealing with water issues, so I'm sure there would be a lot of support for that to happen. On a close line, will local news still be a part of the content on AZPM despite what we're experiencing now?
Oh, absolutely. You know, in the right after the rescission, we I think his manager sat in this room and talked about the path forward, and someone suggested or heard that maybe some stations were going to be merely pass through and not produce any local content and just air the local stuff. I would ask them not to do that. That's certainly not our plan. Our hallmark is our local production. And in fact, as Jack has mentioned, we're doubling down in the news department. We're making more hires here to provide people with more news and information from AZPM. So it will be staying here. It's not going anywhere.
Okay, I think people will be happy.
And we have a responsibility to this community. At a time when newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller, both commercially and in print, we have a responsibility to this community who, you know, privately make contributions to us to support the programs that we provide to audiences. And news is a big part of that. I really want to grow that news group out pretty significantly over the next couple of years.
They can get the local of the PBS and NPR programming anywhere. It's national. They can't get the press room anywhere. They can get it here, though. They can't get Illustrated anywhere. They can get it here. They can't get Tapped anywhere but here, right?
Although we do offer our podcasts available online.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Had to throw that in there, azpm.org. So one audience member would like to hear comments on possibly broadening. Sorry, there's been a change. So Some of the questions we're receiving now are, would there be considerations on any programming changes? For example, it used to be that KUAZ was not news for all parts of the day. We were a mixed format.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, news, there was jazz. This particular question is asking, would it help if we were to revert to a mixed format until things stabilize or change?
Radio and television are really different mediums in the sense that on television, people tune into programs. On radio, people tune into formats. And if you change the format throughout the day, they really are not sure what they're going to get. Research has certainly borne that out for us. Membership has grown significantly. Listenership on the radio side since going to the full NPR format has grown significantly. The programs that we repeat in the evening hours that heretofore may have been jazz just a few years ago are doing significantly better than the jazz format was in terms of providing service to the audience. We don't make decisions solely on ratings, but we look at the ratings to try and understand how to best be efficient and serve audiences where they are.
So you're saying members have really stepped up
Absolutely.
to the news format. Mm-hmm. So switching to a part jazz, part that just, it wouldn't satisfy the needs of our mission and what we're trying to accomplish.
Public stations did that in the 90s for a while, having music of the world for part of the day, and then they'd switch back to news and do classical part. It was very difficult to build audiences. You'd get them and you'd have churn. They'd come in and you'd lose them, and it was very difficult to get them back. Sticking with the same format, news talk format throughout the day has been a change that has been just very, very successful, not just here, but system-wide. I mean, KUAZ, for example, is a very small FM station compared to the stations who are in the number 1 and 2 position in terms of the effective radiated power coming out of the antenna. The biggest stations in Tucson are about 100,000 watts. The second biggest are 98,000 watts. KUAZ is 1,600 watts. It is a fraction of the coverage pattern, yet routinely it's top 3 station in the market. That is remarkable. I would bet that if we were operating on a level playing field at the same power, that would easily be the number 1 station in the market, but we just can't get there with the power we're working with.
Well, I do think what you said about expectations when tuning in, people know what they're tuning in for. You know, they want to hear classical music, or they want to hear jazz, or they want to hear, the news. And I think that says a lot for when people can tune in at any time and they know, okay, this is what I'm going to get. This is the level of quality and service and information I'm going to get from AZPM when I turn that dial to 89.1 or 90.5 or AZPM Jazz.
And the cost factor is really nominal. The biggest part of the NPR fee, as you know, is All Things Considered in Morning Edition. That is the bulk of the cost for that station programmatically. The other titles that are in there are really not very expensive at all.
And that's tied into being a member station as well. One audience member would like to hear comments on possibly broadening the appeal of programming as a way to replace federal funds. The person is suggesting more programs with right-of-center views and programs of more appeal to tradesmen to change a progressive image. Gene, could you offer some thoughts on this?
Well, the image, I guess, is what it is. I can only speak to what we do, though. We don't do left of center or right of center. We do center. And, we had a story that, it was a national story about a year ago, a local story that got national traction. And I was looking at some of the ways that people covered it in some of the places that are either left or right leaning, and it was pretty clear in their headline and what they wrote in the body of the story. And then I went to our news director and said, thank you for covering it this way, right down the middle. I get calls from listeners, viewers all the time. You're too far left. You're too far right. I'm like, thank you. That means we're right down the middle. I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Could the Corporation for Public Broadcasting be reopened in the future, its role restored, and the funding situation reversed?
That would take an act of Congress, literally, to restore the funding. But as of the end of the year, CPB will be gone. I mean, the facility they're in is a leased facility that will be released. The funds will be dispersed. There are about 120 staff members who work at CPB. They will go off and find different jobs or retire. The idea of reconstituting it by adding water in a year or two is just not highly probable. Could it happen down the road? Yes. It is not a quick restart of the process. It's incredibly complicated in terms of the procedures and the policies and the rules that we need to follow to meet federal mandates with respect to audit. You're dealing with taxpayer dollars, so that there is just significant reporting that, frankly, I will not miss. But getting back to a CPB as it exists now would not be a very quick turnaround. I think there have been opportunities to look at that in the short term, and they just have not
you did
had much
mention
uptake.
some specifics in reporting that was required by CPB and whatnot. I do understand that some stations may consider certain things very time-consuming or costly in some ways, but there's also a question of good practice, right? We'll probably still strive to maintain some of those services some of those requirements that were requested or required from the CPB just because it's good practice. Would you think that's
To some
reasonable?
degree, we will. A great example of that, and it's not required by CPB, is our Community Advisory Board. We've got a 30-member Community Advisory Board, and it really helps keep management in the university honest about serving the public interest of the public set that we're here to serve. We're not required to have a cab, but we do because it really is a best practice, and they are an invaluable group of community folks, really from around Southern Arizona, mixed disciplines, professional backgrounds, geography, degrees, education, across the board, and they provide a real valuable service to us. We will likely not do an annual audit next year, and it's not because it is or is not a best practice, but it's an expense. That if we're looking at keeping a person in their seat doing their job or spending those dollars in an audit report, we will keep the person in their seat. That's part of that second point of reducing the expense budget wherever we can. Other reporting is largely governed by FCC requirements, and we will continue, obviously, to do those to protect the license. But the reporting, internal reporting for CPB, most of that will be paused until there's clearer direction in terms of resurrecting CPB at some point, or really, really good reasons to pick up doing those reporting functions again. And really, I think for most stations faced with the cost of spending $30,000 or $40,000 in an annual audit, or keeping an individual in their seat,
a significant amount of time to do that as well.
plus the time,
Yeah.
the staff time devoted to completing that report, would make that same choice.
Can the community donate directly to support reporters and producers' salaries specifically? What about donating directly to local programs versus national programs?
Well, during fund drives, most of the dollars are coming in to support national programs. And the members of AZPM completely fund 100% of the license fees for PBS and for NPR. The CPB money, as well as some member money, have been used to cover the production and broadcast costs associated with local productions. The cost variable, it's considerably higher to produce a local program, half-hour unit, than to acquire one nationally, because on the television side, we're one of maybe 300 stations sharing in the cost of that half hour versus being the one and only producing it locally.
What about AZPM's fundraising efforts? Have they changed? Has AZPM considered other forms of fundraising or cooperating in other ways with Arizona PBS and NPR stations for fundraising?
Absolutely.
And one thing we're looking at just recently is we do not sell advertising. We offer corporate support, and that's part of our fundraising, our revenue stream. Roughly 10-12% of our revenue is corporate support. And we are now looking to work with Arizona PBS on some national buys that we can use to augment our budget. So absolutely.
Would that be difficult to keep track of, or how would you go about discerning which, if you go into a collaboration on fundraising, how would that work?
It would allow our account executives to sell both Tucson and Phoenix to clients, as well as the Phoenix stations to approach clients to sell Tucson and Phoenix as a package deal.
So a larger area of coverage for someone looking to give support.
In terms of efficiency for an agency or for a particular client, it does make sense for them to have one-stop shopping, and wherever we can make that happen, we certainly are open to that. We're actually have undertaken a study to look at our entire development operation recently, and we have a meeting tomorrow with the providers of service to talk about how we can improve and consolidate our membership program principally, but it's in a major gifts and underwriting programs as well, just to look to find greater efficiencies, lower the cost of fundraising for us, and increase the net benefit of it. You know, one of the best ways is through folks who become sustaining pledge donors. It cuts down on the mail dramatically for us, and lets us project to some degree what the revenue is going to look like in a year. And the best of those are folks who agree to have us withdraw from their checking account each month. And the benefit there is we don't pay credit card fees. We get the same savings in fundraising, and the benefit is projectable into the future. Folks can cancel or change the amount anytime they want. That's pretty easy changes to make, but it really does lower the overhead on fundraising for us, both in the mail and in the credit card processing fees, which even at 3 or 4% on top of a gift adds up quickly in a program the size of ours.
We have one more question. How is Southern Arizona helping to support AZPM?
Well, through their, as Jack mentioned, roughly 72% of our revenue comes from our local community. And that is huge. But here's the challenge. So we're losing 13%, so now that number needs to go from 72% to 85%. And they have stepped up in a large way in our recent fund drive. We blew past our goal in the first week, so we're thankful for that. Hopefully that momentum can continue.
It really is a question of creating recurring funds, recurring resources. So folks have stepped up based on the news out of DC. That's great, but will they step up next year? And that's sort of the unknown. Sustaining contributors help to level it out because they've made now a commitment to make a monthly or annual gift, and we can look forward to funding in the future, which both lowers our overhead in terms of the on-air fundraising we have to do and the amount of it. Some stations are fundraising pretty much every day of the year throughout different day parts. That is not what I want our local production to be. And for some stations, that is the bulk of their local production, is their on-air fundraising component. That doesn't seem to be a very healthy approach to fundraising to me. And we've really avoided that as much as possible, really trying to encourage our current contributors and the folks who have the wherewithal and use the products, either TV, radio, or digital, to step up and make that contribution. On the television side, our cumulative audience is about 80% of the market, meaning 8 out of every 10 households with a TV set are tuning in at some point in the year to Channel 6. We've nowhere near that penetration in terms of support. To understand, Tucson is a relatively poor place. There are quite a few households that just can't possibly afford to become contributors. So those folks who can are really needed to step up and help the community, help AZPM, really for the folks who can't.
I want to thank you very much, Jack Gibson and Jean Robinson, for joining us for this town hall on the future of AZPM. Now more than ever, we would love to have your support. More information can be found on our website, azpm.org, and you can always show your support at azpm.org/give. I want to thank you very much for your time this evening. Have a good night.